Good morning, and it probably isn't a good morning because it's the first day of daylight savings. And it's also the first day of spring break, technically. I'm sure most people begin it on Friday or at the very least Saturday. But apparently, spring break doesn't count for career directors. So here we are, first day of daylight savings. Well, second day of daylight savings. First one being the weekend, which was shorter. And lo and behold, because it's spring break, I know that our on-campus Starbucks will not be open. So the cup of coffee with a shot of espresso I was counting on to get me through this morning is not going to be available. But it's not all bad. Today is also the first day of NFL free agency. And that got me to thinking because one of the things about free agency, well, so let me qualify that, right? So I'm a big football fan. You probably have already figured out that I'm a huge fan of the New England Patriots because I probably shared that 9 or 10 times. I may have even, if you were lucky, shown you each one of my 6 NFL replica championship rings that the New England Patriots have won in my lifetime. And I have seen every one of their Super Bowls, even the ones that ended really poorly, like when they got absolutely walloped by a then record amount by the 1986 Chicago Bears, who have yet to do anything since. What was my point? Yeah, so today I said it's the first day of free agency. That's a little bit untrue, right? So it's the first day of legalized tampering. Free agency technically starts 4 o'clock on Wednesday, but what's really exciting, and I'll have the Twitter feed going all day, is that stories will start to slip out that so-and-so has agreed to terms with the Jacksonville Jaguars, or this defensive lineman has agreed to terms with the San Francisco 49ers. And it's very exciting, recognizing that at the end of the day, it's important, but it probably doesn't matter as much as we would like, because the reality is that free agency is not a simple thing. Free agency is complicated because somebody becomes a free agent in the NFL because their current employer or their current team no longer wants or can afford to keep them. And so maybe that means that, it's somebody with really great potential who there's already somebody in that spot and there's no room for them to grow into the starter role. Or maybe it's a team that's really up against the cap, or maybe it's a team that isn't as financially committed to a championship as other teams, or maybe it's a team that just really doesn't value that player that much. And so their contract expires and they let them go. So when I think about salary negotiation, we have to remember that it's a lot like free agency. And except that we're the free agent and we're all coming from somewhere. Now, if you're straight out of school and you've never had a job before this, then maybe a more appropriate analogy would be one of my annual holidays, the NFL draft, where teams are selecting you based on your perceived future value to them. Well, I guess in free agency, it's about perceived future value as well. But in the draft, there isn't that body of work per se. There's the college level, again, the analogy, but there isn't the professional body of work. So you can be a great player in college, you can be a great student in college, but that doesn't mean that you're a professional. And so you can get away with eating pizza and hot wings for breakfast, lunch, and dinner in college, and it still be far better than whoever you're going up against that week on the gridiron. In the pros, everyone's fast, everyone's strong, everyone's super athletic, everyone's talented. And so you have to be able to then be a professional, be able to commit to all the things that happen before you step onto the field, watching game tape, getting to the facility early, working out, practicing hard, showing the team consistently that you have what it takes to be a consistent performer because you're doing it. You're staying late during the season. In the off season, you're staying local. I mean, you take your vacation and whatnot, but you're showing up for work even when no one's looking. Some people say that's what a true professional is. It's do you do what the right thing is when no one's watching? Like me right now. I'm the only one here. Anyway, it's getting a little lonely. It's getting a little cold. Okay, I hope they turn the heat on. It's an unusually cold day for this late into March. I'm getting off topic. Yeah, so it's about value. And so when it comes to experienced professionals, we're all coming from somewhere. We've all been somewhere where, for whatever reason, we're looking to make a change. Maybe it's because we want to make more money. And it's because our employer either can't or won't provide us with that additional money. Maybe we want a better opportunity. Maybe we want to have room for growth so that we're able to have that career. And right now we're at an assistant level, or we're at a coordinator level, or we're at this entry level position. We're ready to make a move to a more challenging position. I had been a career advisor. Well, actually, let me start earlier than that. I had been a senior employment coordinator for many years, and a position opened up in my company for a supervisor, and I went for it, knowing that it was going to be harder, knowing that it would also pay better, and that it would have a little bit more clout. Same thing happened when a manager position opened up. Same thing. A lot more responsibility, a lot of headaches, a lot of stress, and we'll talk about the money. When I'd worked at the One Stop Career Center for a while, I felt like I'd accomplished everything I could do there, and there really wasn't any more room for growth for me. There were people in the seats ahead of me, the director spots, and they were not intimating that they were in any rush to retire or to move in a different direction. And I've always had a passion for higher ed. And so I started looking into career director positions at the college level. Now, I had to keep in mind at that point what my value was. Now, I had a lot of career experience. I had no higher ed experience. So I was looking for my first position as a career director. So I was willing to take less money. It was still a lot more money than what I was going to be making at my previous position. So I was willing to take less to come in and gain experience. Fast forward 8 years later, I was contacted by a recruiter because Elms College was having a hard time filling their career director position. And they showed their hand and shared what the salary range was for the position. And I knew, because I had explored the position before, what they wanted to pay, but now they were sharing what the full range was. And given my years of experience, I've been a career director for 8 years. I had the master's degree, had a lot of experience, and was working on my PhD. I knew what they were willing to pay, so I held out to get the maximum amount. But I knew my value. I knew they had reached out to me. I hadn't reached out to them. And so I drove a hard bargain, which is tough because I really wanted to leave where I was, but it worked out. Now, I don't want to say fast forward. I want to say rewind 35 years ago. And I'm going for a position at that company where I eventually become a supervisor and eventually become a manager. And up until that point, I had never negotiated a salary. No one at my college had offered a salary negotiation workshop, at least not that I remembered. So I didn't know the first thing about salary. And I looked and I got, they called me to offer me the job, and I was thrilled. It was in the daytime. I'd been working overnights and I was kind of tired of it. And I knew the range for the position. I was pretty excited. And they said, okay, we want to offer you the lowest amount. And I was, little thrown, and they said, we're going to negotiate now. I didn't know the first thing about it. I did what I could, and I managed to get them up another 500. I wasn't really happy about that. I really, they had lowballed me. And so I wasn't really happy about it. And so that kind of stuck in my craw for a while. And then years went by, and actually, no, not even years. About 9 or 10 months went by, and I'd really already proven myself, and I was looking pretty dynamic. And you have to understand how the networks work where you work. And so if you know that somebody is a gossip, if somebody is going to, anything you say to them is going to go directly to people in authority or higher up, that's something to both be cautious about, but also to be aware of, because you can make it work to your advantage. So I casually was sharing, oh, I just don't know if I'm going to be able to stay here at this rate much longer. And sure enough, I got called into the president's office, and they moved me now to a maximum amount for my position. Years later, and it was that example where I made it impossible for them to offer the job to somebody else because I so outperformed them in the interview, because I'd really prepared for it. I had done a lot of prep, and I just executed. And so they offered me the job, said I was really interested. But they didn't tell me what the salary was going to be. I had a general idea, but they didn't talk to me about what I was going to be making. And then I got ambushed by the vice president of finance. HR was under them. And I kind of knew that's what they were going to do, because I kind of had a sense on these things. But I was ready. I was prepared. I knew what the job was worth to me, and I had a job. So I was negotiating from a position of strength. I could walk away from the job. At that time, I was busy working on my master's degree. And what I had done is I'd actually figured out a pro-con to actually computate a value for that job. And for me, I had a pretty good idea that if I wasn't making at least X amount of dollars, that I would walk away and feel really good about walking away, because the job wasn't worth it to me at that position. I had a job, I was established, things were okay. They weren't fantastic, but they were okay. And so if I didn't get this job, that was okay, because there's risk. There's always risk. There's risk in staying, there's risk in leaving. There's always risk, and you have to quantify that in terms of a dollar amount. And so that's what I did. And for me, this job was going to be a lot more work. There were going to be a lot of challenges. It was a pilot program that I was going to be managing. There were no guarantees that it was going to last. And indeed, 2 years later or so, the 2 to 3 years later, the state got rid of those types of contracts that pilot program was funded by. And so, now by that point, I was already at the One Stop Career Center, but which was where I had wanted to go. And having been a manager gave me that little bit of extra experience and qualification where I was really in demand with that One Stop Career Center. And I'd wanted to work there for years and years. And so it really was one of those things where I saw the job, I was like, okay. Now, I had done my homework, right? I knew what positions like the one I was applying for paid. And I had done that work to determine what amount of money I could walk away from that job if I wasn't offered it. Now at that point, I'd been in the field for a number of years. I had experience. I had proven myself at that company. I knew my value, but I also knew that if I didn't make at least X amount of dollars, it wasn't worth the risk. It wasn't worth the additional headaches. It wasn't worth all the challenges. And so I had that figured out before they ambushed me. And when they ambushed me, they made me a job offer. And she said an amount. I just smiled. She paused and said, well, we could go up to. I smiled. And then she said, well, why don't you tell me what you're thinking? And I said, I've done a lot of research. I've really thought about this. I've slept on this. I've prayed on this. And I can take this job, but I would need to make X amount. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to accept the position. She paused for a moment and she agreed. But I knew my value and I knew that I wasn't bluffing. If they weren't willing to go to that amount, that was fine with me. That was their decision. But I already knew I couldn't do the position for less than what I had said. I wasn't looking to gouge them. It was a not-for-profit company, but I knew my value and I knew the risks and what was going to be involved. Now, in terms of how did I produce in that position, I really produced. And so at the end of the year, my program had earned so many extra dollars in funding from the state that they were able to provide the entire agency, not just my program, but the entire agency with an end-of-year bonus because I had outperformed so well. That's something that's really important to remember, is that you've got to also be worth it. You've got to deliver when they hire you. So one of the things about today is that, and some of these will not, rather all of these will not be officially announced by the league until Wednesday after 4 or later, but there will be players who get paid more money than they're worth. And that will become very clear because they won't perform. You sign, like hopefully the New England Patriots will be doing today, a wide receiver to 30, 31, $34 million a year. You're going to expect somewhere in the neighborhood of 80, 90 catches, maybe 9 touchdowns. And for them to be a weapon on the field for your football team, one that is going to contribute considerably so that they're worth that money. And next year, a little bit, maybe 2 months before this time of year, there'll be all these high-priced free agents who are released because they weren't worth their contracts, and they become contract casualties, or they get traded to somewhere like unpleasant, like Cleveland. I like Cleveland. I would enjoy living in Cleveland, but the Browns are a train wreck. And so no one really wants to play for the Browns. It used to be the Lions. And the Lions actually signed this gentleman, Scott Mitchell, to this huge free agent contract because he had backed up Dan Marino fairly well the year Dan Marino had blown out his, I believe it was his Achilles tendon. And they never went anywhere with Scott Mitchell. They made the playoffs sometimes, but they paid him so much money. They gave him a ridiculous contract. So you don't want to be Scott Mitchell, right? At the end of the day, you don't want to be somebody who they're like, oh, where they're hoping you leave so they get out from underneath your salary, right? So good news for you is this. Starting July 1, 2025, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, employers will have to share the ranges for all salaries for positions that they're hiring for. So it's going to take some of the guesswork out. Now, some of them are going to be real schmucks about it, I'm sure, and we'll put 19,000 to 75,000. But at least they're being forced to put on paper what some of those items are. And so if they do lowball you'll at least have an idea. So one of the questions I've always hated is, let me just jump back. I was mentioning before that you want to do your research, and that's true. And so here's some resources so that you can actually know your value. You can go to ONET, which is a service of the Department of Occupational, it's a Department of Labor. And I can look up a job like speech language pathologist, and I can go down to wages. I can put in the state, the zip code. and it'll tell me, what the median wages are. I can go to Mass Hire 360, do the same thing, right? And I can see what the ranges are. And so the thing is, though, if you're a fresh out of school grad, you got to know that you're going to be right on the low end, right? Because you haven't proven yourself yet. You're not established. And so, but it'll usually give you a range. You can also use sites like Salary.com or Glassdoor. I'm not the biggest fan of those. They may be like, Jay, there was no range. Over on Mass Hired 360, there is a range. So, for example, entry-level wage, right, for Massachusetts at large. If you go further down here, it's cut off. You can actually see it for Springfield. But entry-level wage, $77,760. But if you're in New Bedford, which is a bit of a more depressed area, you're probably cruising in at more like $75,750. All right, that's a difference of $10. But it can be more dramatic as you go through. I mean, it's 3,000 when you look at the median. But early on in your career, when you're starting out, you got to know that you're going to be on the low end of this and that you're going to have to really support anything above that. This will also give you the benefits and whatnot. Now, once you become more established, then you can go to the median wage, and once you're towards the end of the more further developed stage in your career, you've got all the certifications, you've got all the licenses, you've got all the years of experience, then you might be vying for this higher wage. Now, one of the things, though, is you may not be able to get that where you are, right? You might have to leave to get that money. That's why a lot of these free agents are available to the NFL today. And somebody else may value them more than their home team. For example, we signed Harold Landry. He was released by his team this year because, he's not as valuable to the Tennessee Titans today as he was to the Mike Vrabel-led Tennessee Titans when they signed that contract. Well, Mike Vrabel is now the head coach of the New England Patriots, planning to use a similar system to what he ran on defense in Tennessee. And so Harold Landry has a lot of value to him, and he's coming into his prime. He's 28. That's a really good year. A really good age to be. So we signed him for more than the team that cut him. So the other part of that is you got to find the people who value you. You got to find the people who see your worth. Don't get stuck someplace where you're not valued. I don't mean after a year, right? You got to build that experience. You got to have a good, solid work history. But you got to keep that in mind. So you can also use Glassdoor. You can sign up and use Salary.com. I like using these because they're from the Department of Labor. They both utilize Department of Labor data. I like Mass Hire, not only because I worked for Mass Hire in its previous existence, but because it's actually a website that was designed by the University of Oregon, go Ducks. So they're actually, it's a pretty good website, and it costs the Commonwealth a lot of money to provide it. Now, all you have to do is put in your username and password if you already have an account, which you don't. So you're going to click on Massachusetts resident. And when you click on Massachusetts resident, it's going to ask for a city and a zip code. Just put in Chicopee. Look up our zip code on the bottom of the webpage. I actually don't know the zip code for it. Or if you're stuck, put in Westfield and put 01085. And that automatically gets you in. They just want to make sure residents are using. They'd love for you to create an account because it's easier for them to track usage and justify the expense, but whatever. Then you can access all of these, and you've already seen the ranges and whatnot. So, yeah, I really like this site a lot, and it can really help you. They've also got cool videos on there. It'll tell you maybe the benefits, the education requirements. There's a lot of good stuff on there. Now, if you are ever put on the spot by an employer, and I want to emphasize, you're not to mention salary in the interview or in any of your communications with the employer. You can't bring it up. Otherwise, it seems like you're just interested in the money more than you're interested in the job. That's not a good look. It's like the free agent who just wants to talk about money, but he's not talking about what he's going to contribute. So, however, there's a caveat. If they bring it up It's like the prosecution entered it into evidence in the court case, and now the defense can address it, can bring it, because the other side already brought it up. So now it's okay to talk salary, but you got to be ready for it. You got to know your worth. So you've actually got to go through and figure out, okay, where am I in my career? What are they looking for? What am I bringing to the table? So do I have the level of degree they prefer? Do I have the number of years of experience they prefer? Do I have familiarity with the software they prefer? Do I have a second language that they want? And actually quantify that. You also have to look at what similar types of positions are going for, which will be much easier once salaries are listed. So you can benchmark it. Nothing is exact though, right? Elms College is a smaller school than, say, Springfield College. So they're not exact comparisons, right? You've got to find, in terms of a school the size of Elms in this area, there might be AIC, there might be Bay Path, right? We're not going to compare with Westfield State College because that's a state school and it's always going to be higher because it's state. And so that's not a realistic comparison. So once you know your worth, you also have to figure out, and that's where that pro-con list comes in, what the job's worth is to you and what is your walkaway price. Because if you know your walkaway price that you couldn't possibly afford to accept the job, and this includes not just the risk in taking a position, not only what this position does for you strategically, not only how much more work it's going to be, and how you're going to have to learn a new job, learn a new culture, learn new people, but it also goes into things such as, what's your rent? What's your car payment? What's your insurance? You got to figure all that in to get to that dollar amount. And if you know your walkaway price, it stops being your decision. It starts becoming their decision, which is very liberating because you know you can't accept the job for a penny less than this amount. Talk about stress-free negotiation. I can't do it for a penny less than X. I know because I've done the projection. But you got to be sure that that's your walkaway price and that you're not going to be worried about it at 2 in the morning and say, oh, what did I do? Right? Like Suzanne Summers, you're too old. You're not old enough to know who Suzanne Summers is. She walked away from a TV show in the 1970s and ended up costing herself money. Same thing was true of Shelley. I think her last name was Winters on Cheers. These are people who held out for more money. David Caruso on NYPD Blue. They all held out for more money, didn't get it, and ended up setting their careers way back because they thought they knew their value and they were wrong. And the market said, no, you are not worth that much. Sorry. That's not the lesson you want to find out. You want to be correct. But you need to know legitimately what's your walkaway price. And then it's their decision and it's very liberating. The day I did that, I had no stress. I knew what I could do it for. Now, if you're put on the spot and they say, what type of salary are you looking for this position? Then hopefully you've done your research and you know what the market is paying for someone with your years of experience, your level of education, your qualifications. And then you can say, truthfully, a reasonable level of compensation for a person with my years of experience, education, and qualifications would be between X and Y. I'm not going to define X and Y for you, but those are the dollar amounts. And so depending on the kind of job you're going for, so maybe entry level, I'm going to use a bad example, entry level barista, right? It might be $18, right? But if you can make a cup of coffee that makes me see colors and changes my worldview, right? That's a pretty good cup of coffee. I'd pay extra for that today in particular. I wonder if Uber Eats would deliver me a really good cup of coffee hot. I might be willing to go $25 an hour if people are coming to my coffee bar because they found out I just hired you and you're like the celebrity barista who's going to craft drinks that are just made. And maybe you can do like the leaf in the espresso in the foam, right? Make the leaf or write my name or my picture, like do a caricature of me in the foam. I mean, we're talking, you got to be pretty good to be getting up to $25 an hour to be a barista. You see me working there? But that's what we're talking about. You've got to know that range, right? And so if you go in and you're just, you know, you've never made espresso in your life and you want to be paid $30 an hour, they're going to laugh you out of the room. That's great. Yeah, we'll get right back to you. I wouldn't necessarily leave your phone on. You feel free to turn it off and save the energy charge. Yeah. So you got to know what that range is. You got to define that range, but it's perfectly fine to say a reasonable range would be between X and Y. And you got to do your homework. You need to understand when you're doing the salary negotiations, things like benefits. Hopefully they're sharing with you the benefits package as well. So, what are the health insurance premiums? We could look, I might be offering you $60,000 a year. They may be offering you $70,000 a year. But when you factor in the fact that I'm paying more of your health insurance costs than they are, and you're going to end up, if you go with that job, a much higher deductible, you might not actually end up making more money with that offer than you are with my offer. So you've really got to break it down. What are the benefits? What are the value of those benefits to you? Right? One of the benefits to me of being at Elms College is I can get my college degree for free at Elms. Elms doesn't offer a PhD in history. I'm in a PhD program. They're not paying any of it. So that's not as valuable to me. If I had 5 kids, all of whom were in high school, that would be extremely valuable to me because I could send them all to school for free. You know better than I do what the cost of a college education is. Imagine if you could just wipe the whole cost away for your 5 kids. Think about that. That's a tremendous amount of money. Whereas if I took that same job at another role, maybe with a not-for-profit agency that's going to pay me more money, yeah, but they're not going to pay me that much more money to send my 5 kids away to school. Each of them is probably going to cost me $200,000 times 5. I'm not an accounting major. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. So you've got to think through those things. My wife got really mad at me because one of the benefits here is a free BJ wholesalers membership. And I kept mentioning it. She's like, well, you have a membership. Stop mentioning it. So it ended up being a thing. And so we don't have a membership through the school, even though we would save money. I don't understand it. But after 22 years of marriage, I'm smart enough to know when to keep my mouth shut most of the time. Anyway, back to value. So yeah, what is that? You have to define X and Y, but then giving it as a range. And you have to do very careful calculations on what the actual value of that package is. So that, yeah, I'm going to pay you an extra $5 grand, but you're going to have to use your car. And I'm not paying you mileage, which is probably illegal. So there's the wear and tear on my vehicle. You have to keep all those things in mind. A lot of it's a lot like Moneyball. In fact, in the movie Moneyball, you may remember that Brad Pitt has a free agent or somebody he trades for who's upset because he has to pay for his own soda in the clubhouse. And so when he makes a deal for another player, he gets the other team to, as a part of the deal, pay for a year of his soda or in-house food and beverages for his players because he's working for an owner who's so cheap that the players actually have to put coins in to the soda machine to get a soda. That plays a role too. Like, oh, okay, we'll provide you all this, but you're gonna have to fill out 600 forms to access any of it. You may not know that. You may actually have to develop a contact within the company to find out those things beforehand, which is where networking comes in, which is why I want you to have a LinkedIn profile so that you can get that information, so you can make informed choices. Like I knew before I started Elms that our timesheet system is kind of annoying. You got to put in 7 hours, 7 hours. You got to put in 7 hours, click save, open the next day, put in 7 hours, save. It's really a waste of time. But I knew that going in and I didn't really care. Still, I still rely on the email reminding me to submit my timesheet, but that's neither here nor there. So again, we talked about the pros, cons. Here is a very powerful phrase that you should have in your vocabulary. Would you, could we look into including in my salary offer the option to relook at my salary in 6 months to see if I might warrant an additional $1,000, an additional $5,000 a year? Would you consider giving me a travel allowance since I'm going to be commuting from New Britain? Would you be open to me telecommuting 3 days out of the week? A lot of times it is okay to ask that question when you're negotiating, as long as you do it in a very unassuming, brainstorming kind of way. It can be a way. There have been occasions where employers will actually stop and say, I had never even considered that. That's a neat idea. Let me do some digging on that and get back to you. And you might be able to get some additional benefit that has value to you, right? May not actually cost them anything, but actually enhances the overall value package to you. So something to think about. That is salary negotiation. That's really the thing. So you want to be prepared. And so you have to do your research. Otherwise, again, it's like going to buy a car and you haven't looked in the Kelley Blue Book. You need to know what the value is. And then you can, in fact, think of buying a used car as being in the opposite role, right? You're the car in this scenario. And you know what the Kelley Blue Book is on you. And for similar positions or similar cars of that make, model, and year, and mileage. And so there's a pretty clear range on what's an appropriate amount. You just have to do your research, find it, and then go in fully aware. Now, I want to qualify. Now, there may be instances where there are some things that offset the salary, like I'm really unhappy at my job and I need to find something now. Well, then you're in a different position, right? You're not negotiating from a position of strength. I'm not saying you're negotiating from a position of weakness, but you're in a different field position. You need to be aware, and that's why that pro con comes in. What is the value of this job to you? Is it a company you've always wanted to work for? Is it a chance to work with people you know and love? Is it a chance to break into an industry you've always dreamed of working in? Well, then that walk away number may need to be lower. So, hope that's helpful. This is a bonus workshop for my class, so I'm not actually going to make you do anything. I really shouldn't have said that. Now, when I go to reuse this next year, I won't be able to give a 15 question quiz or something. Anyway, hope you're having a great week.